Now, you all probably have noticed, that Kamala Harris has been doing some more interviews lately. Have you noticed that? She went from doing like 0 interviews to doing 4 or 5. Now, the problem is that they're not tough interviews, right? She's going on The View, she's going to friendly outlets to do these interviews because, of course, she can't stand up to the scrutiny of a tough interview. So she's doing all these softball interviews instead. Now, my friends, the problem with a softball interview is that you still have to be able to hit a softball. And as we've learned from Kamala Harris over the last couple of days, she can't even do that. And, you know, if you notice, there are a lot of folks, not just me, not just the president, but a lot of our campaign staff, and we're feeling pretty excited about this campaign right now. And in part, it's just we're getting down to the final stretch. In part, it's because we feel the momentum of Pennsylvania and some of the other critical states. But you know, in big part, it's that every time Kamala Harris opens her mouth, we gain about 100,000 votes. And we don't have a TV in here. Well, I guess we got this one, but I should have queued it up beforehand. So I'm going to have to remember off the top of my head what Kamala Harris, she said earlier in this week. She had an interview with The View. Have you seen this interview? A few of you had. A few of you decided not to have the nightmare fuel of watching Kamala Harris on The View, so you skipped it. But I do these things. This is the way that I sacrifice as the person who wants to be your vice president. I watched her interview. Now, we got to remember that Kamala Harris, her entire argument for her campaign is that she's not going to be like Joe Biden. In fact, you would be forgiven for listening to her and thinking that Kamala Harris had never even met Joe Biden, despite the fact that she's been his vice president the entire time in office. And of course, we know she cast the deciding vote on trillions of dollars in new spending, because the vice president often has to cast these tie-breaking votes. She bragged about being the last person in the room during the disastrous Afghanistan withdrawal. She bragged about undoing Donald Trump's wildly successful border policies and opening the American southern border. So now she wants to run away from that stuff. So she'll stand up at her rallies and she'll say something like, well, on day one, we're going to tackle the affordability crisis affecting Pennsylvania families. Or on day one, we're going to get serious about that southern border. And anybody with a lick of common sense is saying, Kamala, day one was 1,400 days ago. What the hell have you been doing that whole time? Stop talking about doing your job and actually go and do it. But she blew up the whole narrative of her campaign in this View interview because they asked her, well, what would you have done differently? You've been the vice president. What would you have done differently than Joe Biden? And she says, well, nothing comes to mind. So she just, for 2 months, tried to tell the American people she was going to be different from Joe Biden, and now she shows up and openly brags, in her own words, well, nothing comes to mind. She wouldn't have done anything differently from President Biden. Now, I told the Trump campaign senior staff, because one of them, you know Jason Miller, you've probably seen him on TV. Jason's a good guy. So Jason calls me earlier this week, and he tells me about this interview, and then I watch it, and I'm like, wow, it's even worse than you said. And I said, Jason, what we ought to do is take that clip and add on the end of it, I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve that message, and just run it in every battleground state in the United States of America. And it's amazing, my friends, that's exactly what they did. Go on my social media, you'll see Kamala, in her own words, destroying the entire narrative of her campaign. And I will say, you're probably shocked to hear me defend Kamala Harris, but I'm going to do it. Because when she says nothing comes to mind, that's probably a pretty accurate characterization, whatever the topic is, right? That's just kind of, unfortunately, well, yeah, there's a famous saying that a political blunder is when a politician actually tells the truth. Well, Kamala Harris just accidentally told the truth. And here's the thing. We can joke about it, and we can joke about the fact that she runs away from anything that isn't a softball interview. But we got to be honest. And I know this because I grew up in a family where we suffered when politicians didn't do their jobs. We have got real suffering in the state of Pennsylvania because Kamala Harris isn't doing her job.